because this is sort of, because as women in Virginia, we say, woo, our first was Mildred Long, and that's big, woo, you know, kind of, go Mildred. But when you know the story, it was really, it was like twinkle, twinkle, little crickets. You know, there just wasn't much to it because she was already ordained an elder. So coming in as in full connection was a matter of a vote. So she would have been standing up there with all the men, except there was another woman here that evening named Nancy White. The two of them would have been up there with all the men, and it was simply a question: do you receive these people into full connection? If so, vote yes. And that was it. So it was very anticlimactic that happened. And the fact that there was another woman there that night, now she was ordained an elder as well as received in full connection. And Mildred's first only because her last name starts with an L, and Nancy White's last name starts with a W. So that's the only reason Mildred's first. So in many ways, it's sort of a, you know, it's, when I read it, I was like, oh, I make something out of this. So when you read the book, you know, I talk about them being down there in Virginia Beach and the old, the dome, you know, and it was the year of Sputnik, and I have somebody going by and playing Elvis music, and so I'm trying to create a scene that has a little bit of excitement and energy, and people from her church were there, and then when she's standing up in front of everybody, you know, she's so nervous, and what if they vote against her? So I try to create some drama around it, because it was just so flat, and it was history making. Yeah. Interesting how that works, isn't it? Okay. So then I wanted to mention too that Mildred continued to serve a total of 5 churches, including the one that Brandon Robbins is at now. Yeah, so I interviewed some people there, and that came, and they allowed me to speak then and share the book. And one of their circles was going to study it and all of that. Well, finally in 1979, they both retired at the same year and at the age of 65. They really were quite different people in personality, but dear friends right up until Mildred's death. She died in 1990. Lillian died just 2 years later in 1992. Neither of them ever married, but they did have close female friends, including the housemate for Lillian, I mentioned Mary Gills, and Nancy White was a housemate for Mildred for a while when they insisted that they live in parsonages. They couldn't be in a parsonage by themselves. And then Mildred always had walking partners. So this is another picture of Lillian, and she's a little bit older on Easter Sunday at her church. And that's Mildred as a young woman. And one of the articles, they said the prettiest preacher in Virginia. And her parishioners, that was easy, 1 or 2. And her parishioners said, oh, that's not how we think of her. She's a really good preacher. And I thought, what a good thing that they didn't make it about her appearance. There's always been people that get it, you know. This is the dorm she lived at Dan River Mills. This is her visiting some parishioners. When Nancy and Mildred were both in the Danville area, they did a whole section of the newspaper. They had pictures of them, and I think I have a copy of it back there, and articles. They had pictures of them visiting people and preaching and washing dishes together, and you know, they just found the whole thing fascinating, that there were 2 female preachers, you know, lady preachers that were there in that little town. That was really big news. This is Mildred, because you know, the dress was so important, and this is her playing softball. But you notice all the women have dresses playing softball.
I wore them in high school.
Yeah. Yeah, I wasn't allowed to wear pants in school. Yeah. I could only play half the basketball court. I hated it. Anyway, there she is outside the church in Fredericksburg. She is a pretty woman. Oh, wait, back up. Go on with Cynthia. And this is Mildred in her retirement. She looks so different, doesn't she, than she did earlier. Yeah, maybe didn't age as well. Let me just real quick say something about the title of the book. So it's called Nevertheless She Preached. And some of you may know this story, but you know, it's just another piece of history that's in the news for 2 days and then passes on. On February 7th of 2017, the U.S. Senate debated confirmation of Senator Jeff Sessions of Alabama to become the Attorney General. Some of you may remember that back in 2017. And Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts spoke against the confirmation, criticizing his record on civil rights. And she quoted a statement by former Senator Ted Kennedy had to do with Sessions, and she read a letter from Coretta Scott King that was written to the Senate Judiciary Committee in 1986, and so she's going on, she's got her information, and she's telling it to this hearing. So while Senator Warren was reading the letter from Mrs. King, the President of the Senate, who was Chair Steve Daines of Montana, interrupted her. Reminder of Senate Rule 19, which prohibits ascribing to another senator or to other senators any conduct or motive unworthy or unbecoming a senator. So you were having a hearing, but you couldn't say anything negative. Whether or not to approve them, that made no sense to me. But anyways, so Senator McConnell objected, and Senator Daines called for a vote. And this is what they said: the senator will take her seat. So Senator Warren couldn't continue, and she wasn't allowed to speak for the rest of the hearing. And it all passed. So anyway, so following the Senate ruling to silence Senator Warren, Senator McConnell said on the Senate floor, quote, "Senator Warren has given a lengthy speech. She appeared to violate the rule. She was warned. She was given an explanation. Nevertheless, she persisted." And so women in the women's movement go, "You bet she did," So that became sort of the phrase. And I have a T-shirt back there because it took on different nuances. Nevertheless, she persisted. There was nevertheless she led, nevertheless she taught, and for preachers it was nevertheless she preached. And so the clergymen of Virginia Conference made available these T-shirts that says nevertheless she preached. So I thought, I gotta call it that. They have a T-shirt for it. So I wanted, at the end of the book, that isn't gonna work. At the end of the book, I have a little bit about Cynthia and her story. And I really wanted Cynthia's story in the book. So I put it in there, and the writers group that I went to twice a week, they said, it doesn't fit. You need to take it out. I said, no. Because if I don't tell her story, nobody's going to tell her story. She was the first female district superintendent in Virginia. It was really one of the first in the whole Southeast, but only because when it was announced that she became like third or something. Second. But it was the same year. They started the same year. How we split hairs around this, I don't understand.
2 months different. Bishop Blackburn was really ticked off.
Because just depending when the bishop announced it as to who was first. But anyway, so what I did, I took her story and the parts that had to do with Lillian and Mildred, I put them in the book proper, and then in the appendix I gave the fuller story of Cynthia's story as the first BS. And one of the things I noticed about this, we're not exactly sure when it's taken, but we think it might have been the Southeast training for new district superintendents. Possibly, you think?
Yeah, because I recognize several of them as new ones.
Okay. And you'll notice that there's several African Americans in there. And I think there was an awakening in the Southeast jurisdiction that we need a more inclusive cabinets in all of our conferences. So that was the year that there were several women came in, and the year that there were more African Americans that came in to serve on cabinets.
So that year there were 3 all total, women.
Yeah, okay. And you were second.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's hear it for history making Cynthia.
I was second, but it was the biggest conference. We still are the biggest conference by the skin of our teeth, but we still are. Marg and I had a lot of fun talking back and forth about this because when I became the superintendent of the Petersburg district, which was in '86, and I was 36 years old at the time, I was told by the conference historian that I was the second youngest district superintendent ever in Virginia. The other one was a young man in 1786, I think. He was 28. And then I came along. They didn't live very long then. But it was, I think it was, who did you mention a minute ago? The one that's 100?
Oh,
Ray Wren. I think it was Ray Wren that announced that at annual conference that year. But Mildred and Lillian were both retired on the Petersburg district when I came onto the Petersburg district. Now, to make this short, is that Lillian was fragile, she was quiet, and when I would go see her when she was in the hospital, I swear it looked like nothing was in the bed. I mean, she didn't even make a lump in the sheets. But she always, always, always had her hair done and had her makeup on and would not see anybody if she didn't. She just felt like that was what a woman pastor was supposed to do, and she did it for her whole life. And I imagine she had something in there about when she was in her coffin, it had to be done up right. But she's a very sweet person, very kind. But you were talking about Mildred. Mildred was a bit of a spark plug. She used to bring me roses out of her garden and vegetables out of her garden, and I'd find them on the steps of the district office. And I'd go, oh, I know where those came from. Didn't even have to have a card because I knew. But we'd have lunch, or she'd come in and just see how I was doing. She reminded me a couple of times that it was because of what Lily and she did that I was where I was. But she just was she was like a good friend. And you could ask her all kinds of things about, her experience or whatever, and she was just really good. She was always good about answering things. But I had fun with Marg when we were doing this because I learned things about them that I never knew. And it kind of made me feel like that it was special to have them there. But, I had weird things happen when I went into the ministry because Marg and I, they were the first two of a lot of things. But when Marg and I came in, all of a sudden, women were the thing. And they wanted us on every committee in the annual conference. And she and I were on, some of them were alike and some of them not, but we always had people calling us saying, can you be on this committee, can you be on that committee? It totally wore you out. And after more and more women got on there, we disappeared. All of a sudden nobody called us and it was like, oh, thank you, Lord. But now there are, how many? I thought it was around 300. Retired and ordained women in the annual conference, and there's about 1,000 pastors all total. So there's still not a huge number, but there's a whole lot more. And it's because of people like Mildred and Lillian that those of us who are in the ordained ministry know what kind of work they did. Because Lillian in particular, 30 years in the same church, and she worked constantly, and she never drove. Can you imagine that, serving a church and she never drove? But they were just fascinating people, and I'm glad you wrote the book. Thank you.
I want to open up for any questions or comments. Some of you haven't read the book, some of you have read the whole thing, some have read part of it. So questions or comments, Mark?
Was that Holland Park in Richmond you were talking about? I went to that church as a child.
There was a Russell Chapel. The Russell Chapel was there, and it's the old Sunday school room where Lillian's father taught.
Oh, I didn't have to have anybody ride with me, and I didn't have to have anybody live in the parsonage with me. Matter of fact, they might have got irritated if I had, but anyway.
Yeah, things changed, didn't they? Yeah.
So, just there were a number of things that struck me in the book, but the fact that if if you were meeting with the superintendent, his wife had to be present in that meeting as well. And I was shocked by that. I mean, it was almost like they didn't trust that it would be a business.
It's such a different mindset.
It
You know,
is.
our former vice president was that way. He would not be in a room with a woman by himself.
Gosh, that just amazed
He
me.
was very careful.
But Mark, one other quick question. So I can't remember which one it was, but I think it was Mildred that really struggled with depression. It sounded like at the end of her life.
Lillian.
It was Lillian. Was that true, or was that part of
They
historic?
said that when this is the phrase that I heard, she seemed to be lost.
Okay.
And at the countenance of their own face when they said it, all of that was based just on that. She seemed to be lost.
I just thought that was so sad after she had given so much of herself.
It was sad, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And by then you've fallen in love with the
You had
character.
you did great character development with both of them.
Good.
Just great.
Good.
You mentioned that she started her journey in 1944. Did any of that have something to do with the fact that a lot of the men were at war?
Definitely.
Women had a greater opportunity?
And I think that because when the men came back, then it was sort of like, okay, women, you can go back where you belong now, right? So yeah, we don't need you anymore, thank you. But, yeah, you can go back. Yeah, they wouldn't go. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that the proceeds from the book are going to two places. One is for some of our female students in the Bukhloy in South Sudan, and I particularly want to thank one of the circles, Hookman Circle in particular, for their continuing support of that school. But we have a student who's been given a full scholarship. It doesn't mean that you get everything paid for. Anyways, to Africa University, our Methodist Africa University. And so some of the proceeds will go to help her. We got her there on campus, and she started her classes, and she's doing well. But we need to send her some spending money and that sort of thing. And the other one is we have a brand new program in Virginia called Servant Sister Scholarships, and it's for women who are in seminary who are seeking ordained ministry, particularly in the areas of addressing justice issues with creative ministry. And so this year was our very first year to award any of those, and one of them was awarded to Lynn. And the earrings. So clothing was a big thing. If you read the book, they're always talking about what to wear. And I did that because what I heard from the men, the colleagues, quote, colleagues that knew them, was that this is what they said about Lillian. She dressed like a man. Even the men would lower their voice and just sort of shake their head. She dressed like a man. I don't know where they got it, but they all said it sort of the same way. So then I asked her parishioners, I said, tell me what Lillian wore, what Miss Lillian wore. And they talked about the white suits, and I said, did she ever wear like a men's tie or a jacket? And they said, oh no, she was always very feminine. So I decided she must have worn the ministers' meetings, because that's what the clergy remembered, but her parishioners had no recollection of that. So that's what I did in the book. I thought, well, there must be something to it, so that must be when she did it.
None of the pictures showed her dressed as a man.
No. But that's what I heard. She dressed like a man. And more recently, then everything was, with pearls and, just they couldn't have anything to distract it from anything. But more recently, women have been critiqued. Well, shoes are always a big deal.
Yeah.
And even here, my last year here, one Sunday, on a community Sunday, I wore open-toe shoes. And as one of the older gentlemen leaving the church, he said, I noticed your toes today. I think for some men, feet must be a sexual. But anyway, so I said, I guess it's not quite time yet. I thought maybe we'd passed that barrier, so on community Sundays I always cover up my toes. Oh, wait, let me get to that. Okay. But then there was a whole thing with dangling earrings. That's the new one. So another clergywoman, Fran Cooper, bought these for me because that was sort of the thing, and so women don't preach it. It's distracting, Well, apparently being female is distracting in a pulpit. If you read the book, you know I had the part about when I was expecting our daughter, and then one of the parents was critical that they thought I just should step away from public display. You know, I shouldn't be in worship on Sunday morning until the baby was born, because you could tell I did it. But then there was another woman at the church who asked me to come to her house. And so I went. She was a young woman, a lawyer. She and her husband both were lawyers. And she'd been asked by President Jimmy Carter to be a federal judge. And she was one of the, 69, 79 women or 70 women that were asked to serve. And when she saw me in the pulpit, pregnant and in a robe, it was a power trip for her, because she said, my problem is I'd really like to do this, but I just found that unexpected. And I don't know about I don't know if I can manage this. So it was sort of the woman in the robe who's expecting, and it's in a public place. But she went on and accepted the position. So it's just interesting how you can see the same image and how different it is. My kids will know that she did it, or I think I could be a federal judge. I mean, it's a big difference. Yeah. Cynthia, you want to tell me?
Oh, yeah. What she said reminded me, when I was on the cabinet, I was out of, there were 18 DSs back then. And so I was, the lone female until the last year. I was that would be the 6th year. Anyway, I was known as Snow White and 17 Dwarfs.
Okay, we're done, Susan. You don't. Yeah, we're good. I don't think there are any other questions.
Marg, Cynthia, thank you for sharing our story, our history. As women in ministry. Thank you. Especially if you're coming back for the concert at 3. I know you're anxious to get home. At the very bottom of your notes, if you are in a circle, fellowship, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. If you are not, here are our 2. The first one is Ada Mae Bookman. It says TBA.